Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Braden.
I'm Tommy. And if you're not open-minded to close-minded people, does that also make you close-minded?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think it has to. I think it has to.
That was just the debate I was having with myself. Most like the context of this is from like a coaching perspective.
hmm
Obviously, you can be open-minded or closed-minded about any topic. But I was
hmm
thinking about like, okay, as a coach, I think of myself as an open-minded individual. I want to hear other people's perspectives and I'm always open to changing my like the way that I operate or adding new things or removing things that I don't think are useful. And obviously some coaches are the opposite of that. They have a way of doing things and then that's that. And I don't particularly agree with that style of coaching. So then I thought, if I'm not open-minded to the closed-minded method, I was like, am I really an open-minded coach anymore?
Well, that's interesting. I don't know. Like it's tricky because I think like there's a difference between being open-minded or not to their perspective or their frame of mind. Like being open to their closed-mindedness is different than being open to the stuff that they actually do in their coaching. So if you're talking about being an open-minded coach, then I think you need to be open to like every exercise, every program structure, every intensity range or whatever, um, and believe that they all do actually have a place. And I don't know, for me, like I think of myself as an open-minded coach, and I like to I like to think that like even if I don't use something or I know that I'm not going to use something because maybe I don't understand it or maybe I don't agree with the reasons other people are using it. If it works, like I support you. If you're doing a good job, then you keep doing that. That's great. And I don't think that makes you closed-minded if you're gonna decide to not use something. I don't know. Like that's a weird one. That's a weird one
I know
because
I'm having a tough time with it because part of the conflict I'm having is I get what you've brought up. And it's like, okay, I'm open minded. I'm listening to this person. I want to hear their closed minded perspective. But I feel like for me, I've already made up my mind that I'm not going to adopt that closed minded approach
so then you're closed-minded because you've already. It doesn't matter what they say. You've decided already.
because part of the conflict I'm having with this is that is it possible to take bits and pieces of a program that operates on a closed minded approach that doesn't change? Because like there's like it's always the same. So you adopt it and do it, or you don't adopt it. There's no real way, I think, to adopt a strict, structured, unchanging plan. Because then if you just go ahead and change it, then you haven't really stayed true to the principle that they're using it by. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's yeah. Because as soon as you adopt it and change it, and like because if it's a rigid thing and you put it within your free-flowing thing, just by that nature, it's different.
It's
Like
not
you've
going to
you've
operate the
changed it.
same anymore.
Yeah, you've changed it. So that I guess that's I mean, well now that's interesting because I guess if you have decided that you're an open-minded coach, you can't you can't run their program.
No, that's
Like
my thought. Like if it's that strict and close, like when someone says, "Oh, we never do the following, and we always use this," or when people take a hard stance on, "I will never weightlift my athletes." Oh, I will always use weightlifting with my athletes. Oh, we only, you know, do back squat. We never do front squat or whatever the hard line someone takes is.
mm,
It's like you were saying, if I adopt that approach and don't do it that way, then I haven't really adopted that approach.
yeah.
You to use it the way it's being intended to be used,
Mhm.
you can't mess around with it too much.
At all, I would say.
Yeah.
Hmm. That is interesting.
So that was the internal philosophical debate that I was having with
Yeah,
myself.
I'd say that's relatively philosophical. Um, yeah, that's interesting.
Because I'm now questioning if I'm an open-minded coach,
Yeah.
or
Well,
if
I
I'm
mean,
mostly open-minded, just not open-minded to closed-minded coaches. Because I've closed my mind to them.
yeah. Well, and that's the other thing I was going to ask. Like, if you, so I feel like I'm an open-minded coach as well, and the reason I think that is because I feel like I'm never going to get it 100% right. Like I know that I'm never ever going to write the best possible program. And I, in some part, don't believe that the best possible program exists.
I was going to say, I don't even think it's doable because we'll never know enough.
Right. And so if that's a belief that I have, is that because I'm set in that? Is that then a closed-minded belief? If I don't believe that the best program exists and that you should always keep learning and trying stuff.
That's me. It's a tough question to answer.
Yeah.
So,
That's maybe the hardest one we've had.
and I was hoping that by bringing it up with you, I might get some more clarity, but I think I'm more conflicted than I was
Yeah,
when I shouldn't have asked the question.
you've confused me now too. Oh man.
Yeah. And now I've put doubt on you. And now you're thinking about it and you're like, oh, now you're in the same problem. Now you're having the same problem I am.
Well, I don't know. Like I still feel strongly good about how I
Strongly good.
whatever. I don't know.
I love how you have fancy words like ethereal and all these other words I don't even remember. And then you go strongly good.
Yeah. That's yeah. Browen compliments me all the time for being really smart, but then she makes fun of me equally as often for being stupid. So it
We'll blame
works.
English.
English is hard.
Yeah.
But I do feel good about my perspective on things. But now I'm not sure if I'm supposed to call myself open-minded or closed-minded. That's the thing. I'm definitely not changing how I feel. Just I don't know what to call myself.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. And this is just the conversation around coaching. Now you can do this for every single topic, every single realm of, you know,
And I think there's and I do think there's things that I believe that pertain to life as a whole that I mean, right now I don't think anyone can argue me out of those points, those beliefs. And so in that sense I'm closed-minded to life in some aspect as well.
so yeah,
So
I wanted to ask you because I wasn't sure. I was like, oh, this will hopefully make an interesting intro with closed-minded versus open-minded.
yeah. Well, I think it is interesting. And I'm sorry I didn't I didn't
Oh,
shed
that's
any
okay.
I didn't
It,
shed
like
any
you
light
said,
on
doesn't
that.
change how I think about closed-minded coaches.
Yeah.
Still
Well,
don't
yeah.
like them,
And I think that's fair.
but maybe now I'm one of them.
Does that mean you don't like yourself?
No, but I'm wondering if is it. You watch more
I
movies than I do. What's the you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain? Is that
oh I don't
Batman?
I've heard that. I think it's Batman.
Is that or like the Joker from the Batman movie? Is it
Something
Joker
it
or somebody? Sounds like
I think
something
it
the Joker would say.
I think it's from a Batman movie. It's been a while since I've watched Batman.
Someone can correct us.
Yeah.
But there's that quote, and so now I'm wondering, like, have I been coaching long enough that I've gone from when I first started coaching, thinking, yeah, I'm open minded, I want to absorb everything, and now I've been coaching long enough that I'm like, man, closed minded coaches are the worst. And then has that just made me closed minded because I'm cutting off?
Well, you have to imagine that they were all open-minded at one point. And I think you also have to like if you've been coaching for a long time and you figure out stuff that works for you,
Well, eventually you have to have some like beliefs and what
yeah,
works and what doesn't work.
like you develop your system. I guess it's just maybe it's just the attitude when you enter a conversation. because
That's a good point.
because you'll probably, when you have a conversation with another coach, you'll absorb some of what they say and try it and see if you like it. And I feel like the more conversations you have and the more you try and implement and you affirm your style and your system and all those things, the less you'll be taking from other people and the more you'll just be like refining what you already do. But I guess if you go into those conversations still thinking that you could learn something, then you're open-minded. If you go into those conversations thinking that, every other person in the world is an idiot and I know everything, then you're closed-minded,
Yeah, I think you might be right about the attitude approach,
Mm.
where if somebody opens up with, hey, I have some ideas and I'm no expert, but here's some things to throw out, I'm probably going to listen to that person.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to if someone intros with, I'm the smartest person in the world, or I'm an expert, or you get the feeling right away where they're like, I'm right, I know exactly what I'm doing and everyone else is wrong, then I've probably already decided I'm not listening to this person.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think it is very much like, even if they don't like, I don't think anybody is actually going to say that, you know what I mean? But if people, I guess you never know. If people come off like this, if they're saying things like this is how it works, you know what I mean? Like this is what I do in training because of this, and it's all, these are facts, then that's closed-minded. But if people are saying like, we do this in training and this is what I've seen from my experience, this is like the evidence that I've seen, this is the trends, this is my opinion,
Yeah.
You're open-minded. I'm on board with that. You don't know, because we don't really know ever.
No.
But if people think that they know, then I think that's when they're closed-minded.
Yeah. Well, that maybe makes me feel a little bit better.
Nice. I like how we got really confused. It said that we got really confused, and then
We talked our way out of it.
yeah, now we're cleared up. Now we're good. I mean, that's kind of how my preparation for this episode went.
That's sort of why I picked this one, because I thought this was going to be a good intro to what we were talking about today, because of all the unknowns.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Question marks.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, I kind of went into this with like, I have some ideas, I have some thoughts, I feel like I have a good handle on things. And I started to look into stuff and I'm like, I don't know what anything is. But then after a brief conversation before, now I think we're solid. We're going to get into it to talk about unilateral versus bilateral training today.
Yeah.
And for the next one or two anyway, after this.
Yeah, this will definitely, there's too much to talk about for this just to be a one-parter.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really important discussion to have.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's fair to just quickly try to cram a bunch of stuff in one episode, because this is a topic that I think is relevant now. It's been relevant in the past, and it's going to stay relevant in the future with coaching in regards to strength and conditioning or performance coaching and things like that. It's not a topic that's going to go away. I don't think ever.
Definitely not. And I feel like it fits into what you're saying in the intro too. Like I think people come down like on one side or the other. Like some people are very close-minded that unilateral is the best or bilateral is the best. And I think everybody's like, you need to do the other one sometimes at least. But
you'd hope.
I mean, even the guy that you said, Mike Boyle, I listened to one video of him and he at the beginning was like, I do think people should squat sometimes. They should have the ability to squat sometimes. But outside of having the ability to squat, he's like, why would you waste your time with that when you can do unilateral stuff? So I don't know. I think people do get very dogmatic about it.
Yeah, and there's different schools of thoughts. And like you said, some people are very on one side of the fence. Some people are very on the other in terms of bilateral is superior, unilateral is superior. But, we talked today about, opening up the discussion of, well, what even is bilateral and what even is unilateral? That's because right. I don't think it's so cut and dry. And you used the great example of saying that it exists on a spectrum.
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
I would completely agree with, because I don't think it's as easy to classify some of the stuff as maybe we assume off the bat that it is.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it was interesting to see, um, like some of the stuff in the research, and maybe we'll get into the research later a little bit, but
Too early for
uh,
that now.
yeah. Um, but a lot of the stuff that was comparing unilateral versus bilateral was like you're squatting, that's a bilateral movement, and you're split squatting, that's a unilateral movement. And I'm like, is it though? Because you're using both legs. So I definitely like it's certainly more unilateral than a squat is. Um, but yeah, like we agreed before we started recording that if you've got your two legs on the ground side by side, they're both, you hope, equally contributing to the movement. We'll call that true bilateral. So that's, any kind of squat variation, any kind of deadlift variation.
Yeah, deadlift,
Um,
front squat, back squat, anything like that. I think we're
yeah,
both in agreement. That's a true bilateral movement.
yeah. Bilateral lower body. I guess
Yes.
there's a whole other
It's
there's a whole other part for the upper body stuff. Um, and then true unilateral is going to be one leg on the ground contributing 100% to the movement. The other leg never touches the ground until you're done the set.
yeah, never touches the ground, or never.
Or you could, I mean, maybe between reps, you could say, but
Yeah, but in terms of
outside of
the
that,
actual movement, like if you were doing a pistol squat, for example, where the one
yep,
foot is sticking up, or if you were
yep,
doing a single leg squat on a box where the non-working limb is just dangling free,
yeah, or
it
like a
doesn't actually
single,
contribute
yeah,
to the movement in any way, shape, or form.
yeah, single leg RDL would probably be the only other one that I can think of that's in that spectrum
Yeah, because you
and
only
on
have
that end.
one
Sorry,
foot and one limb in contact.
yeah, and then you've got like so many different levels of things in the middle, which that's where I would put the split squat, and we agree on that.
Yeah.
That that's kind of like your split pelvis, thing. And like split squats, you're going up and down, and on RFS, you're going up and down, and like both legs are in contact with the ground at all times, and probably not contributing equally, but not as front leg dominant as people like to assume, I think. Um, and I'm just thinking now, like lunges, one leg is off the ground for a period of time, but not the entire time. And like a traditional step up, one leg is off the ground for a period of time, but not the entire time. So
Yeah,
that's
and that's
even,
why to me I put all those in that. Like I like to think of things as unilateral, bilateral, or they fall in the middle in this what I call pseudo unilateral,
mm-hmm,
where you're biasing more load on one limb than the other,
mm-hmm,
which would happen in like a split squat, an RFS, something like that, but also in a step up or a lunge. At different
mm-hmm,
times during the movement, you're favoring or biasing one limb more than the other.
mm-hmm.
It's changing throughout the rep, and that's why to me those are pseudo. They're not true unilateral movements where only one leg is active, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and then there's things too, like the B stance RDL or like a B stance deadlift or something like that, where you've got like your
Or
feet
like
are
a
essentially,
stagger.
yeah, like your feet are like they're real close together, and one leg's contributing, the other leg's not. So you don't really have that split pelvis situation. And I don't know, like one leg is doing most of the work for sure. The other leg's kind of stabilizing, but I wouldn't be surprised if, like the glutes and maybe some of the upper hamstrings on the upside, the inactive side, are contributing to like hip extension and things like that. Um, or there's like a kickstand hip thruster, which is kind of like another thing that's like that. Um, and then the other one actually that I was thinking of is a Jefferson deadlift, where I think maybe both legs are contributing equally, but like the load is distributed unevenly, and you have to do both sides that way.
Yeah,
You
again,
know.
that's going to bias that. again, would probably fall under that pseudo unilateral, because
Yeah.
it's going to bias one side or the other,
Hmm.
but not completely eliminate
Yeah. And I
one
just,
side from the movement.
exactly. And then and that's why I like to think about it. Like, I think it's easy to put it in three categories. Um, I like to think of it as a spectrum because some things are definitely like closer to the unilateral, some things are closer to the bilateral. Um, but I mean, for these purposes, I think we can go true unilateral, true bilateral, and that in the middle pseudo unilateral. I think we can call it. Um,
But yeah,
yeah.
I just think that's important to bring up because it's going to change the way the movement is done. It's going to change the activation patterns of the muscles. So if you are trying to think about, well, the exercises I'm programming or what I'm doing, is it unilateral? Is it bilateral? Is it somewhere in the middle? You should probably have an idea of where these things are falling, because you don't want to say, oh yeah, I do unilateral training all the time. We don't do bilateral stuff. But if the furthest you're pushing the envelope on that unilateral side is something like a split squat, then, well, are you really getting the benefits from unilateral training? When we talk later about what are the upsides of training unilateral, what are the upsides of training bilateral, if you don't know where these exercises fall, and if you're not exactly sure if what you're doing is or isn't on one side or the other, then you're not going to have an understanding of what adaptations or what positive changes you're going to be able to make. Because you might say, hey, look, all these benefits you get from unilateral training, but the furthest I push it a split squat. Well, you might actually be more on the end of getting the benefits of the bilateral loading than you would the unilateral loading potentially. So I think that's an important consideration. And when we get into talking later on about their tools in the toolbox, you probably need to have a little bit of all of them in your training. Then it's important to know, because you can go, oh yeah, okay, I do have some true unilateral, I have some true bilateral, I have some things in the middle. So I'm probably going to check all the boxes I need in terms of changes or adaptations that I'm looking to make in the people I'm working with.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I also think it's important for when we get into the bilateral deficit conversation to keep in mind that, if someone says something is unilateral, that doesn't necessarily mean that only one leg is doing the work, because there's a lot of things that people will say are unilateral exercises, which they kind of are, but you're getting a significant contribution from like the non-dominant leg. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well. Um, did you want to talk about the upper body stuff?
Oh, I mean,
it's
that could be,
it's kind of a mess. We can go into it a little bit, I think.
well, I guess I'll say this. I think it's important on the upper body end to maybe think about it with that same spectrum that you brought forth, right? You have
Even
true bilateral and you have true unilateral. But like I said, I was thinking about something even like, you know, a single arm push up. How unilateral is that? Because you still have 2 feet in contact with the ground
Mhm.
that are providing you a lot of stability and support and activation in order to do the movement. So, like I said, that could be a whole can of worms to open. But I think you said it great with the dumbbell press, for example. You might have something like a bench press where both arms are working and acting on the same implement, the same barbell. Then you have a dumbbell press in the same position, but now each arm is acting on different implements. And then you have a single arm dumbbell press where one arm acting on one dumbbell, and then you have to switch and do the other side. That again, there's that spectrum of more or less bilateral or unilateral, depending on what you're looking at.
Mhm. Yeah, and I liked what you said too about the like a single arm handstand push up or a single arm pull up as probably the only true upper body unilateral exercises.
Yeah, there might be some others out there that I can't think of off the top of my head, but like if you really want to classify one limb working and moving your body, The
Yeah.
same way a pistol squat is only one leg moving your entire body weight. I mean, I'm having a hard time thinking of other upper body exercises that would be truly unilateral.
No, not unless you could do, like, if you had the core strength to get into a row position and not use your legs, or a push-up position and not use your legs,
That'd be so hard.
like a single arm planche. I think that's what that's called when you
Yes.
have a no feet push-up.
Yeah.
So not a lot of people can do that stuff.
No, it's probably off the table
Yeah.
for 99.9% of who you're programming for.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, if you get some single arm work in there, you're probably fine. You're going to have less of that, the concern about is the other arm contributing or not. You're going to have a lot less of that discussion with upper body stuff, I think.
Yeah. But again, I like to think about them on that same spectrum that you've discussed, which, again, from a coaching or programming point of view, I think it's an important concept to have, or at least think about where do certain exercises fall, in your opinion, along that spectrum, so you can program accordingly.
Yeah, 100%. So in reading the research, most of what in hearing people talk about it and reading the research, most people, from what I saw anyway, came down on the unilateral is better side for sport anyway. If you're powerlifting or weightlifting, nobody's going to tell you that split squatting and doing single arm push-ups is better than your competition movements. But
it's not even a discussion.
No, exactly. For sport, though, people will say things like unilateral exercises are more functional.
I hate that word.
I know you do.
Oh, man.
But the big thing, or one of the biggest things that kept recurring, was the bilateral deficit. And that's the idea that if you can, say, produce 100 newtons of force with two legs, then most people can produce like 55 or 60 newtons of force with one leg. And then with the other leg, so you add that together, that's 110 or 120, which is more per leg than the bilateral movement. And so for that reason, you should do everything on one leg, because you're getting more force per leg, which is clearly always better, right?
And presumably going to lead to more adaptation.
Yeah.
That's more of whatever it is you're looking for.
That's what they say. And one of the first things that I came across was that the bilateral deficit is very strongly dependent on your training age and what type of training you do. So people...
That was the first point that I have here, is some studies show the deficit can be trained away.
There you go. People that haven't trained tend to have a bilateral deficit, is what I found. So untrained people, which unfortunately most of the research I came across was untrained people or recreationally active people.
Which to me are not trained.
They're definitely not trained. Or one study said trained males, as in they've been training for at least 6 months. You're not really trained.
Still a rookie. Still in your first season. That's
exactly right. But yeah, so, and then other studies were talking about, basically what you said, that the bilateral deficit can be trained away. And the more training you've done, the smaller the deficit. Or they also talk about bilateral facilitation, which is the opposite, that one leg can produce less than half the force of two legs, which I'm very confident in saying that I have that one. So I know that the bilateral deficit is not like 100% pervasive.
Well, I think it just speaks to the specificity of training, and that if you spend a lot of time doing a certain thing, you're going to get good at that. And one of the issues with that, not issues, but one of the question marks around the bilateral deficit is there's so many theories around it, right? Like Like you said, is it really a thing? Is it just something that's there in untrained individuals? But then as you start to train, that deficit disappears, or you have bilateral facilitation, which, like you said, is the exact same thing, just in the other direction. And is it something that's just there in an untrained individual that becomes less and less of an issue as you train? So then does it even matter at that point?
Right.
Because there's some theories that some of these research papers have proposed where the brain works in like a cross hemisphere way, right? That we have two halves of our brain, one on the left side, one on the right side. And oftentimes what we see is things on the right side of the body show activity with the left side of the brain and vice versa. And so are we naturally predisposed to being, call it unilateral or active in an asymmetrical way, right? We walk opposite arm, opposite leg. And so our bilateral movements, call it more unnatural to the body. So then is the bilateral deficit there because of a lack of training? And then, like you said, you start barbell squatting with 2 feet or doing overhead press or bench press or something like that. And all of a sudden we can train away the bilateral deficit because now the brain or the body becomes better at activating both sides of the brain to activate both sides of the body at the same time, which goes against maybe our natural locomotion pattern of the opposites working with one another. So again, there's like, I don't know if there's a way to prove that, but it is an interesting theory that, you kind of go, well, does the bilateral deficit matter if it can be trained away?
Well, I mean, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't come across it. It makes some sense to me. Like we definitely were designed to like the reason we exist, I think, is because we can move without using our arms to move. Like we can carry stuff and move at the same time. So like that's the reason we exist is because we can move bilateral or unilaterally, sorry.
And
In
even the
that
cross-slink in your
hemisphere.
body,
Yeah,
right? If you
exactly.
look at the way the structures in the fascia
Yep.
cross from, like, let's say the right shoulder to the left hip, for example.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. So that makes a lot of sense to me for sure. Um, and I wonder actually, because I think people are more used to doing, like, if untrained people are more used to doing unilateral movements in a day-to-day life, like walking or running is a unilateral thing.
Stepping
Walking up,
upstairs. Yeah.
that's what, yeah, walking upstairs is like you're literally just doing step ups, or like even lunging down to tie your shoe or something like that. Like you do, or if you kneel, people kneel all the time, and you lunge to get out of a kneeling position. Um,
The only day-to-day thing I can think of that's bilateral is getting off the toilet.
and that's what everybody says. That's what everybody says. Um,
Or I guess
and
getting out of a chair. But even then, I don't know. Like, how many times do you like shift over and move one way? And like, so
well, and that's right. People are going to do different stuff, but I wonder, because I do think that there's certain cultures where squatting is more common. Um, like if you need to do something
oh,
on the floor instead of kneeling, you're just going to squat. Um, I wonder if you took those people and did this research, if you'd find a smaller deficit or no deficit.
or babies.
Um,
Babies squat all the time.
yeah, they do. That's right.
Yeah. And then we just
So,
lose it because we never use it anymore.
so I wonder if it is something to do with, I mean, it has to be to do with some level of repetition, right? That's the only way we get good or bad at anything is the amount of repetition that we have. Um, but yeah, so that's an interesting thought. Um, I mean, it depends how people are measuring stuff too. Like if you're comparing a back squat to a split squat and saying that the split squat was more than half of what you back squatted, so bilateral deficit, we just established that two legs are working in a split squat as well, so that's not fair.
Yeah.
So I don't agree with that.
If you
I did,
blew out your knee, you can't split squat.
yeah,
So that leg
exactly.
must be doing something.
Yeah. I did also come across some papers that were looking at like a leg extension, an isometric leg extension and
Interesting.
measuring the force. So 2 legs leg extension compared to 1 leg extension. And I guess the amount of force that's there, you can't really argue with that. And I don't know why there's that much. Well, actually, here, I think in an isometric situation like that, there's inherently more stability than you'll ever find in real life.
Oh yeah, because you'd be seated in a chair. You can
Yeah,
probably brace with your upper body, like you
exactly.
very much a laboratory setting
Exactly. So
for control purposes.
yeah, which and it all makes sense. But you're gonna like if you have in that setting having for the bilateral movement, both legs contributing to the amount of force plus your upper body, um, you're going to still like if you compare that to the unilateral movement, the only thing that's now not contributing is the opposite leg, right? So you're still getting all of the stability from the like your upper body and your arms possibly holding handles or something like that. Even the opposite hip, I think, is going to be pushing into that seat.
I
And
think it'd be
so,
really hard not to do that.
exactly. So I think not all of the force is coming from that one leg. So you can't say that that one leg is producing more than half the force because like if you couldn't produce any meaningful amount of force if you didn't brace your upper body.
Yeah,
You know?
you're a wet noodle. Can't
Exactly.
like
And for that reason, like if you compare that to a true single leg movement, like I don't know. I don't know if this research exists, but I would be comfortable saying there is 0 people in the world that can pistol squat or like true single leg box squat half of what they can back squat. I don't think that person exists
that would be
because
that would be a feat and a half.
that is a true like if you're saying that's true, then that's a true bilateral deficit in my opinion. But
Yeah.
I do not think that person exists.
Well, and one of the other factors too that was interesting to bring up is that the bilateral deficit could be exaggerated because of the speed of the movement, right? And so if you look at a force velocity curve, the more time that you have to do a movement, the more force you can apply.
Mm.
And so if you are going to be comparing let's use the lower body because I think it's more relevant. If you're using a 2-legged movement versus a 1-legged movement, that 2-legged movement is going to be faster and give you a smaller window of time to apply force. So in a lot of the cases where we're looking at the bilateral deficit and then we're saying, oh, look, more force on 1 leg, more force on 2 legs, are we accounting for the time difference? Or is that being taken into account? Because a lot of them just show peak forces,
Mm-hmm.
which then again favors the unilateral movement because you've given it a larger window of time to apply force,
Mm-hmm.
which then isn't necessarily a fair representation to say that, oh, 1 leg is better than 2 legs because you get more force. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but I get more speed out of the 2-legged movement.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So how are we going to account for that? And maybe some of the studies we haven't come across, maybe they do account for that. Maybe they don't. But a lot of what I found dealt with like peak outputs or peak wattage, peak force, things
Mm-hmm.
like that, where to me, the velocity component is going to play a role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense too. That makes sense too. Um,
And it sounds
the
like we're trashing the bilateral deficit. I mean, I definitely prefer, I live a lot more in the pseudo unilateral
which is fine.
world.
There's nothing
Um,
wrong with that.
so I think that's just important. Like we're not just, it's not like we're trashing unilateral training.
No, I'm just because I think a lot of the people that
I just have
base
question marks around the
their
bilateral deficit. That's all.
yeah, and I'm saying the same thing. And
Yeah.
people that have like that base their entire training philosophy on unilateral is better because of this. Well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with the this thing, you know. So the other thought that I had about it this wasn't in any of the papers I came across. But if you're comparing a split squat to a back squat, or even like a single leg squat to a back squat, I'm wondering if the amount of freedom or the load actually like dampens the nervous system, because in a squat you have less movement options than you do for a split squat or for like a pistol squat, for example, especially if for the split squat, pistol squat, you're holding dumbbells instead of a bar on your back.
Well, stuff can move wherever now. You can
Exactly.
shift the dumbbell forward, backwards, wherever.
Exactly. And you can, like for those unilateral movements, you can drop the dumbbells, you can fall forward, backwards, sideways, doesn't matter. It's all fine. With a barbell on your back and you're squatting, you have to be a lot more specific and careful about how you're getting rid of the weight. And if you're going to fail, you have to be very specific about that. So I'm wondering if, especially in untrained people that don't have control of any of the movements, that especially because you're stronger on two, like you can lift more weight with two legs, that to get the same intensity, you have to put more weight on the bar, which is then more dangerous, and it's harder to get out from underneath that weight, which is then more dangerous. That your nervous system is going to it's going to give you less output, because it's afraid that if you keep putting more weight on the bar, that you're not going to have the control necessary to do it properly, and you're going to hurt yourself.
Yeah, your brain's like, you've put me in a pretty suspect position right now.
Exactly. And for a split squat, you don't need as much weight to get to that same intensity, and it's easier to get out from underneath. At least I think. I don't know. I haven't done a lot of split squatting, so you'd be able to speak to that better than I could. But definitely for a pistol squat, it's so much easier to, like, I fall down when I pistol squat all the time, and it's fine. So I'm wondering if that's part of it. And then as you do bilateral movements more often and you develop that control, then your nervous system is like, okay, here you go. You have the keys to the engine. You
Yeah,
rev
you're
it
pulling
up.
back the governor.
Exactly. So I wonder if that's part of it as well. With regards to, even if you're not doing like bilateral movements in training, you just train, you get stronger, you develop more torso control. I feel like that'll carry over to your bilateral movements anyway. You know.
Yeah, no, and again, and I think that's just I think this is why it was good to kind of look into this, because I haven't really looked much at the bilateral deficit. I've heard of it where, oh yeah, you add up the forces of both legs and it's a higher value than what you get if you use both legs at the same time. But I've never really, there was almost just like a belief like, oh, well, that's what the research says. There are the force numbers. Okay, it must be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you just take it for what it is. And it wasn't until we started to look at this and like read some of the papers and listen to some things, and where you maybe start to go, okay, it doesn't change my stance on, I still need to have unilateral and bilateral movements in there. I want to have a mix of both. But like you said, it removes the thinking of, oh, we have to do unilateral training all the time because of the bilateral deficit. And it almost goes unquestioned.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, it's a thing and you have to train this way, done. And it's like, well, have we even looked at it? And based on some of the research that's out there, there's probably still a lot of work that could be done in that realm to take a harder stance on what we really think is true or untrue in regards to the bilateral deficit.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the papers, well, a lot of the people that I heard talk about it anyway, were speaking about the bilateral deficit as if, yeah, it's fact, it exists. So you benefit more from unilateral training, and that's it. Like, that's also a fact.
And maybe it does exist, but if you can train your way out of it,
And you can.
and you can't, so then it's like, well, then does it matter as much as whoever it is making it out to be? Maybe not.
No, I don't, and I don't think it does. I don't think it does. Um, and I mean the papers too. Like a lot of them agreed that unilateral training provided more benefits, but and a lot of them reported, a unilateral or sorry, a bilateral deficit. Um, a lot of them were untrained, which we know that has an impact. Um,
If they're
but
untrained, you have no idea what you're getting into.
exactly, but a lot of them said too that unilateral and bilateral worked equally well to improve whatever metrics they were trying to improve. Not all of the studies said that, but a lot of them said that. And from what I can tell, the ones that tried unilateral by themselves, bilateral by itself, and a mix of both, the mix of both won all the time.
Yeah.
So doing both is better than doing either one of them by themselves.
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes into the last point that we bring up today is we're like introducing the idea of this bilateral versus unilateral training is that it seems to be, or at least you get people kind of taking sides almost like, oh, I
Mm.
think bilateral training is better than unilateral, or unilateral training is better than bilateral. And it it has this feeling of being like a contested debate
Mm-hmm.
where you have to pick a side, and like that's the camp that you live in, and you fight the other side to your death to prove
Yeah,
them wrong, to say that the camp that you're in is better. And I'm not getting the feeling of that. And the
it does
more
make
that
sense.
we've looked into it, the more that I've started to read, you start to see, okay, there's these proposed benefits of bilateral training. And then there's these different benefits of unilateral training, which would support what you brought up, that using a combination of both is probably going to give you the best outcome, because then you're using the right tool at the right time and tapping into the changes or the adaptations that you want, and you're not leaving something on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, yeah, both are effective, and there's no reason to hardline your training to say, oh, no, 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 we don't do bilateral stuff here. That's not functional enough. Or, oh, no, no, we don't do unilateral stuff here. That's loaded too light. Doesn't give us anything. Like, to me, those mindsets and those mentalities shouldn't exist, because it's probably just going to hold the athletes or the people you're working with back in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I hope at this point, if there's one thing that our listeners can take away, it's that it depends. Um, and especially for sport, like team sport athletes, this entire time we've been saying, like, you need variety, you need variation. And what is a better way to vary a movement than to change the stance of it? Like that's you change it like so drastically by doing that. And and people will say that a lot of like sports are played on one leg, like one leg at a time anyway. Like you run, you cut, you jump off of one leg, whatever. Yeah, you run for sure on one leg. That's true. But there's a lot of stuff you do in sport that's off two legs. And there's some sports that I've been looking into more lately that like you do a lot more stuff on two legs. And there's some positions in other sports that you do a lot more stuff on two legs, or at least the important stuff is on two legs, so it's not as cut and dry. It's not as like functional or not functional as people think. And I'm not going to say that those sports should only do bilateral stuff. Of course not. Like variety is important, if for nothing else than just health purposes, you know. But I think there's a lot of performance benefits to doing both as well.
Yeah. And if you take some examples of, you know, a number of sports, look at something like volleyball,
That
probably
was the
coming off of
first
two
thing that
feet when
the
they're
first
doing a block jump.
even their like approach spike jump, like it's a you approach off of one leg at a time, but you jump off of two. Most of the time, most people do.
Yeah. And then even if you look at a sport like basketball or football or something like that, where there's cutting and change of direction, there's times where if I'm running in the open court or the open field, I'm going from one foot to the next. But if I have to stop and slow down and change direction and then make a move on a defender, well, at some point I'm going to have 2 feet on the ground. And it might be bilateral, it might be split, it might be like, I don't know. I'm going to be doing that based on what the defender or the person with the ball or whatever's happening that's out of my control in the external environment. So if you watched, 30 seconds of a player in basketball or a running back or a corner, somebody on the football field, you're going to see all different times where 2 feet on the ground, 1 foot on the ground, jumping off of 1 foot, jumping off of 2 feet, now no feet on the ground, and landing with 2 feet, landing with 1 feet or 1 foot. Sorry. There, there's so much movement variety and quality that goes on that it doesn't make sense to lock somebody into only unilateral, only bilateral, because guess what? They might have to pull from either of those toolboxes when they're in the field of play.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that. That was the thought that I had this morning. Like if you are running as fast as you possibly can, to your right, and then you need to turn and move as fast as you possibly can to your left as fast as possible, like you cannot stop yourself on 1 foot. That like in the bottom of your change of direction, like if you're doing like a pro agility 5-10-5 thing, that bottom position, in my opinion, looks a lot more like a squat than it does a split squat or a pistol squat. You know what I mean? Like
And again, you
you're
may be
low.
favoring one leg or the other,
Yeah, for sure.
but you're using how many pictures of sport do you see 2 feet on the ground?
A lot.
A lot. So again, they might be favoring one or the other, but you're still using both legs.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of skills that require 2 legs producing force, even equally. Like if you're blocking or if you're tackling in football or rugby or something like that, or rucking in rugby, if anybody knows what that is, or if you're in a scrum, like that's just a squat. You're horizontal, but it's just a squat. Like it's all.
And even that makes me think when we were way back in the weightlifting when we were talking about swimming, whereas you're going through the water, it's alternating, but then when you spin and twist and you push off the wall, that's
Yeah,
a 2 foot movement. So
we made that point. We made that point then. That's a squat.
And you're always changing positions. And so that's why to me, if there's anything that people take away from this, like you said, it's like, don't entrench yourself in one camp or the other, but rather have an understanding and knowledge of what is unilateral going to give you, what is bilateral going to give you, and then know when to apply them at the right points in time, which we'll talk about in the later episodes. We won't just leave people high and dry.
No.
But to me, I think there's so many sort of rooted ideologies in this bilateral deficit, unilateral versus bilateral, that it's almost nice to take the first episode just to kind of clear the air and go, okay, here's where we're coming from.
Yeah, definitely. There's no need to choose one or the other. And I mean, you make a great point that like athletes need to be in all kinds of different positions and shapes and stuff. And like when we bring people on like Jay who talk about that, there's portions of their workout where it's just you're trying to make this shape with your body, like you're practicing being in different shapes, you're practicing coordinating your body in different positions. And I think that's where strength and conditioning is going, where you need that variety and that like the movement capacity to just do a million different things. Why would you like
limit yourself intentionally?
Like, yeah, you've got this huge subset of movements that you could do that you just, no, those ones are bad. There's no reason for it, but they're just bad. So we don't do those ones.
Yeah. Like I said, that's the part that doesn't make sense to me. And that's why I thought the whole open-minded, closed-minded coach thing, I was like, oh, this will be a good one to bring up.
Yeah, it was
for this one. Cause maybe everyone should be open-minded to, using a mix of unilateral and bilateral. So, I mean, and I'm definitely excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, me too.
The next, talk about actually applying it and what benefits could you get. And because we just scratched the surface.
Yeah, we did. And I don't know if it's true, but it feels like the research has just scratched the surface too.
I mean, I think so.
Like we touched on it a little bit. it doesn't feel like I was underwhelmed with the amount of things that were out there.
I was
I was
underwhelmed with the quality of what I read.
I was also underwhelmed with that.
So
But yeah, I was surprised. I was surprised by that, especially something that maybe it's not as hotly. Do you do you feel like it's hotly debated consistently or not as much? I feel like there's other things that are more hotly debated or
I don't know.
more.
I wonder if, like, I mean, this could be a whole chicken egg sort of
Mhm.
scenario, but like if this is the research that's out there, and if it's not super great research, and if there's not a whole like bunch of it out there, is stuff maybe just being taken for granted in terms of like bilateral deficit's a thing. There's nothing we can do about it. We got to train this way because of it. And if it's almost becoming just an accepted thing rather than something that people actually want to look at critically, that I don't know.
Yeah.
Like most of the people I work with and most of the people that I communicate with are pretty, from a coaching standpoint, are relatively open-minded people and use a combination of these things. So I guess in the immediate circles I'm in, maybe it's not as contested, but I mean, there are definitely people who sit on one side or the other and they don't
Hmm.
seem to want to budge.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the lack of volume and quality of research out there is maybe enough to get that ball rolling. I don't know. Again, to me, that's a chicken to the egg type thing, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like with a lack of research and a lack of quality research, um, it's easy for things to just be opinions and
and just be
like
taken for what they are. I go,
what they
okay,
are and like what you see and what the trends you see from your athletes and you know which that's fine too. Like anecdotal evidence is that's evidence, and if it works
absolutely.
for you, if like we said off the top, if it works for you, then do it. That's perfect. um but also have an open mind, I guess, is the point of the entire episode, um to some extent. But yeah, I'm pumped. I'm pumped to get into the next one.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I'm excited to, like I said, start peeling back the layers and going, okay,
Yeah,
like
it'll
what
be
do
a
we
little
get from
bit.
bilateral? What do we get from unilateral? How can we maybe
Yeah.
bring the two together
Hmm.
in like a really good way?
It'll be a little bit different than other ones too, I think, because of the lack of quality research. We're gonna it's I think it's more ideas, more how things can be applied, less about this is what the research shows,
Or maybe
which will
more
be
anecdotal in terms of, like you said, this is what I've seen, or this is what,
yeah.
you know, because yeah, there's unfortunately not a lot of great stuff to pull from.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Um, Hopefully, though, the listeners will be able to pull something great from your music selection from this week.
Oh, dude, I got some good stuff for you.
You do? That's good because I don't
Oh,
have good stuff.
okay. Everybody needs to go out and give a listen to Kelly J. DeVoe. I think
Okay,
he's from Manitoba.
I'll actually write that down.
This is, I first saw this. I got reminded of it the other day, but I first saw this. I don't know what year it was, but he was featured on Jimmy Fallon.
Hmm.
And Jimmy Fallon has a segment, I don't know if he still does it, that was called Do Not Listen. And
Okay.
he shared with you a bunch of music you should not listen to because it wasn't very good.
Okay.
And this guy was featured on it with one of his songs. And like it wasn't very good. But dude, it's so bad it's catchy. Like it's awesome. And then I realized when I got out to Alberta, there were other people who had seen it.
Mm.
And then that like spurred it on again. And then I was talking to some people last week and like I brought it up and they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you've never heard of the song like Hottie or Spotlight by Kelly J. DeVoe from Jimmy Fallon's Do Not Listen?
Mm.
And they were like, no. I'm like, dude, you got to give it a listen. So it's not necessarily the greatest like produced music by all time, but it's so catchy. It's so entertaining that I think Jimmy Fallon got it wrong. This is a you should listen. You maybe don't want to listen, but once you start listening, you won't stop listening.
that
And I'll
remi-
just like you just got to go out. You have no idea what you're getting into until
that
you listen.
yeah, that reminds me of Rebecca Black's Friday.
It's better. It's way better than that.
Okay, well that's good because
Like in a
that one
worse
was kind
way.
of catchy. All right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like if you thought like, oh, that wasn't the greatest song in the world, but it was kind of catchy.
Right.
This song is like even worse and even catchier.
Okay. I'm having such a hard time imagining what that would be like. It feels like, I don't know. My brother likes
Also,
to
for the
watch.
viewers or the listeners, however you're taking this in, watch the music video too, along with it. It just makes it that much better.
Okay.
It gives you
All
the
right.
full experience.
All right. I will definitely check that out for sure.
So
Um,
I can't
yeah.
say I was listening to it consistently, but if you've never heard it, go check it out. It's
Okay.
it's
Okay.
entertaining.
That kind of reminds me of like my brother will watch like good bad movies with his friends sometimes and just like make fun of them the whole time. Like movies that are so bad that they become good because they're funny.
Yeah, they become
Um,
like those.
yeah. So
What's that one called?
I've got a bunch of them. So we're talking like
Oh,
Mega Shark, Mega Shark versus Crocosaurus, Mega Shark versus Mecha Shark. There's Mega Shark versus Giant Squid. Mega Shark versus Colossus, I think, is one. And then there's like the Sharknado movies. There's 7 Sharknado movies.
I didn't know there was 7. I thought there was like 2.
There's 7. Um, and there's like I think there's a Sharkalanche, which is the same thing, but it's
But
snow.
an avalanche of sharks.
Yeah.
No.
And then there's also Lava Lantula, which is lava tarantulas.
Where will it stop?
Well, there's more. There's more than that.
Oh,
But
I can imagine, but I'm just like,
yeah. So anyway, I hope it's better than those. I'm excited to check it out. um, I honestly didn't listen to anything really. Nothing new. Like I still listen to BTS all the time. Um, but yeah, I didn't. Since we last recorded, I haven't worked out at all. I've been busy.
okay.
So I haven't listened to too much. But one of the things that I was going to say on a previous episode that got overshadowed by my little punk phase
Oh,
was Lindsey Sterling, who you probably know Lindsey Sterling. Really? That's surprising to me. Okay.
no idea.
She does like pop violin stuff. And she does sing as well, I think, over top of the violin. Um, she has one. How I learned about her was there's a Pentatonics cover featuring Lindsey Sterling of Imagine Dragons Radioactive, which is quite good. Pentatonics is an a cappella group from Canada.
Yeah.
Um,
Mentioned that in our Christmas special.
yeah. So they have a cover of Radioactive by Imagine Dragons featuring Lindsey Sterling, but she's got a lot of original stuff and it's good. Like there's all kinds of like more like meditation, fall asleep type music, and then there's some more intense like upbeat rock music. If you like, or like pop rock kind of music. If you like violin, I really like the violin, or fiddle, however you want to call it. So yeah, she's solid for sure.
So I'm just thinking you can cleanse your ears with this after you've.
Yeah, it's a great palette. I would be shocked. Like there has to be something in her catalog that every single person on the planet likes. I would
Well,
be
I'm just
shocked if that
thinking if
doesn't
you've
exist.
gone out and listened to now what I've recommended you take a listen to,
Yeah.
and you didn't enjoy it, you can cleanse your hearing with this.
Yeah, I think
Because
that's
this is
correct.
presumably a professional musician who's going to
Oh
produce
yeah, the production quality is good.
better music.
Yeah.
So you have an out route or
Yeah.
an escape route.
Nice. Out route's good. Sweet. Yeah, that's cool. I'll check that one out. I'm intrigued to see what that's like.
I almost want you to watch it like right now while we're still on the call once we're done recording. Like I want to see
that's
your
fair.
reaction to this.
I
We'll
mean,
of course stop recording, but that's
yeah, that would be bad content.
yeah, but that We'll stay on the call after for that.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. But yeah, for now, maybe I'll update the viewers next time about what it was actually like.
So you can give them some warning what they're getting into.
Yeah. But for now, yeah, excited for the next one. If people have questions about unilateral versus bilateral, this will probably come out before part 3. So hit us up. If you fall real hard on one side or the other, let us know why that is.
Yeah, I'd like to hear about it.
Yeah.
Genuinely, not like in a sarcastic
Yeah,
way.
for real. Yeah,
Yeah.
if there's something that we didn't talk about or we're not thinking about, then let us
Bring
know.
it up.
Or if you do research, then tell us about that.
Or if you found some good research,
Yeah,
let us know.
yeah,
Let us know.
Yeah. So if you want to do that, then hit us up on Instagram, Speed Strength Show, Speed Strength Performance, Braden Southern. And that was the Speed Strength Show. Thanks for coming along, world.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.